Hello, everyone. Good to see you all.
Hello, Nia.
Hi, Ava. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I made it. That's the success of the day.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Everyone, feel free to unmute yourselves and say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
There.
Hello.
Hi. Good to see you both familiar and new faces here. As we let people join in these first few minutes, if you want to put in the chat where you're calling from, we'd love to see where everyone's dialing in from.
Oh. Yeah.
Welcome from Atlanta.
Tracy.
We have both coasts represented.
India, oh my.
Thank you for staying up late for us. Wow.
Exciting.
We'll give folks maybe
India.
2 more minutes.
Oh my God. India.
What?
Wow. Wow. India.
Okay, I'll go get it. I'm on my Zoom right now, but I'll go get it. Oops.
Probably get started in about 1 more minute. Let a couple folks join us. It's nice to be calling in from outside. Looks like a lovely day. Well, I will go ahead and get us started. So I'll ask if your microphone's not muted right now, if you'll just please mute it. So first of all, my name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Visitor Experience Manager at the Museum of the African Diaspora. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today for our monthly African Book Club. Before we get into today's event, I want to share a few statements just to ground us in this space. So MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter as there are multiple pandemics killing us, including the ongoing systemic violence against Black people. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Jonathan Price, and so many others who've lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. We want to acknowledge that, unfortunately, as this list of names continues to grow, we will continue to say their names and continue to bring awareness in the fight for real justice for the global Black community. I also want to acknowledge the spaces that we're occupying. Though we are gathered today virtually, many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, and our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose lands we are located on. It is with deep respect that MOAD acknowledges that even in a virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are all on native lands. And so we thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area and beyond who have stewarded this land throughout many generations. And so our monthly African book club is an ongoing series. Moad has been very fortunate to partner with Faith Adiele since fall of 2019 to co-present the African Book Club. Faith started the book club a few years earlier, and since it has grown, and now we've had to kind of pivot and adapt to this virtual space, but it's actually brought a lot of gifts in that we can have folks calling in from all over the country, all over the world to join us for these conversations. And so today we will be discussing the book His Only Wife by Peace Adzo Medie. And we're actually very fortunate that Peace will be joining us for the first portion of today's conversation. So she'll be joining about 15 after, so in a few minutes. And we'll get to engage with her, hear directly from her about the process, and then we'll round out the rest of the event with the remainder of our dialogue. So I will be facilitating today's conversation. Unfortunately, Faith, who regularly is here to help facilitate, will not be joining us. So she sends her regards to everyone. So before our author Peace joins us, if anyone has questions for the author in this first portion of the event, I'd ask now if you would send those questions to me directly in a private message or put them in the chat, and I will be fielding and helping facilitate the questions with Peace when she joins us. So if you have a burning question, please do put it in the chat and I'll make sure it gets to her when she joins us. Just kind of a general house rules for the event. When we do get to the more open dialogue part of the conversation, I do ask that everyone respects the space and make sure if you're going to share, we want to make sure everyone has a chance to say something. So please wait 1 or 2 people in between sharing. If you are not the person speaking, please do keep your microphone on mute. And we're really excited just to get into this conversation. Since we do have a few minutes before she joins, I would like to open up if anyone has initial thoughts about the book. As a forewarning, in these book clubs, we do talk about the ending. So there may be spoilers, just a heads up. Have most people here had a chance to at least start the book or get into it? You can raise your hands. Oh, wonderful. I see many hands. Great. So does anyone have an initial thought about how you enjoyed the book? You can either raise your hand. Michelle, looks like you have an initial thought.
I love this book. It was a great read. Not that I think that books that are fast reads are superior, but I just love the characters, the plots, and I didn't really know a lot about Ghanaian, is that what it is, culture, but I got a sort of a bird's eye view of what it might be like to live there. So I thought this was a really great pick.
Great. Thank you. Ole, you had a thought as well?
Yes, I liked the book and it was a fast read. But throughout much of the book, before I got to the end, I was angry at how the main character was being treated, how Affy was being treated. It's just, and not just by her husband's family, but her own family. And I didn't find it humorous. The blurb on the back of the book says there's a lot of humor in it. Somehow I didn't get in touch with the humor. But it was a good book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll definitely get into that discussion with Peace, I'm sure, but all the complicated family dynamics and power structures that really impact the challenges that Affy navigates, as you were saying, on both sides of the family and the relationship. Any other initial thoughts?
Yes, can I speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so Yeah, I'm dialing in from India, and like Ole just said, even I have not read a lot of Ghanaian culture, so this was something new for me. But I did find the similarities because India also has a lot of arranged marriages here. So that was something from his only wife that struck me, and it was something from a completely different country, from a new author that I was reading. But a lot of the elements of patriarchal societies were things that I see around here, but then you're seeing it happening in another culture, and that really resonates a lot, and it added to my reading experience of the book.
Yeah, that's great, picking up the parallels. Absolutely. Any other?
Yeah, for me too. This is Jackie. For me too. I mean, just because I've spent so much time across so many places that she named, were just so familiar to me that I could actually picture these scenes and these characters happening. And then when she talks, about her father, her mother, and she being kicked out of the government housing, which actually happened to my family because my dad also worked for the Nigerian government. So there were so many things that just read so true to me, and I could just so relate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the as they shift between cities, and also then like the elements of class that come up in those shifts, I think that will definitely be something that we talk about once Peace joins us as well.
Nia, I also wanted to add, I think it really adds to the richness of our book club. It's so interesting to me that there's like a Liberian character, and we had read the other murder mystery that was in South Africa with the Liberian. So just understand, it just really adds that we're going with different countries, and within the last few books we've read, there's somebody from another African country who's a character in a book, and just to see what those thoughts are, what one culture says about another on the continent really adds to the richness for me too, and to the richness of continuing to read books in the books that we're reading for the African Book Club. So thank you.
Absolutely, that's a good point. I'm glad that's very affirming to hear that we've been, doing a good arc, and tapping into different countries and cultures throughout this book club, and also reading Wetu Moore's book as well, bringing in those elements too. And thank you all who have been sending me questions. These are great. So I'm taking note of those. If anyone else has other questions, please do put it in the chat or send them to me. Things may also come up as she's on the call too, so you're welcome to continue sending those questions, and I'll work them into the conversation. So we probably still have a couple more minutes, unless Elizabeth lets us know that she's joined.
She's in the waiting room, so I'm going to let her in. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful. Hello, welcome, Peace. It's so great to have you today. My name's Nia, and I'm facilitating this conversation. I'm representing MOAD alongside my colleague Elizabeth. So we're all here, very delighted to get to speak with you. We've all been starting the conversation discussing our initial thoughts and how much we've enjoyed reading your book. And so we're very honored to be in your company. So I've shared with everyone that we're going to start the first section of today's book club, getting to speak with you and hearing from you. So I'm wondering if you would like to start the event by both introducing yourself and perhaps sharing a passage from His Only Wife. I think you're still on mute.
This keeps happening to me. Yeah, I was saying thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be joining you today. And thank you for taking the time. to have this conversation. So my name is Peace Adzo Medie. I am a writer, I am a scholar, and His Only Wife is my first novel. It came out in September. And of course, I will answer more specific questions once we begin the conversation. But I would just read really shortly from a passage from the book, and I think this is one of my favorite scenes. And this is when Afi meets Ellie for the first time after they've been married for several weeks. So I will just read a bit of this. Ellie came at 1:36 p.m. I knew the exact time because I was sitting and staring at the analog clock on my phone when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me and I dropped the phone. I hadn't heard the lift stop and open on my floor. My mother rushed out of her room and mouthed, "Go," while pointing to the door. I hesitated. For some silly reason, I wanted to fish my phone from under the chair before I answered the door. "Ah, open the door," she said with sound this time. I stood up and smoothed my dress over my hips. My armpits were moist. It was a good thing that the fabric was light and patterned so that my sweat stains would not be visible. My feet felt heavy so that I needed extra effort to lift them. I imagined that I looked like a marching soldier. The frown on my mother's face told me that she was displeased. The bell rang a second time. She flashed her eyes as if they had the power to physically push me toward the door. My hand was so damp with sweat that it slipped off the round doorknob when I tried to turn it. I wiped my hands on my dress and tried again. This time I was successful. Ellie broke into a smile that reached his eyes when he saw me. He was leaning against the door frame like someone who had been waiting for a long time to be let in. "Please, good afternoon," I managed to say in a near whisper. Should I shake his hand? Should I hug him? A kiss on the cheek? Last night I'd imagined hugging him, but now no greeting seemed right for this almost stranger who was also my husband. It didn't help that he was gently leaning against the door frame and openly staring at me, his smile intact. "Afternoon, Afi," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. I lowered my eyes to look at my hands and then my feet, anything to avoid the intensity of his gaze. "Please come in, Fueli," I heard my mother say from somewhere behind me. Only then did he look past me into the flat. I breathed a soft sigh of relief and stepped aside to let him in. Thank you.
That's a great passage to open with. I think it's the moment that we as readers and also Afi has been waiting for, this first impression of what Ellie is going to be like. I think you start this novel off even from the beginning with this unusual circumstance where we're present at this wedding and yet the husband is not there. And so it's been building up to this moment where the two of them get to meet for the very first time. I'm curious, when you begin thinking about the concepts for this book and starting to develop these characters, what was the buildup for you coming up with what would this first scene of them first meeting be like?
Well, so that first sentence, Elike married me in absentia, did not come to the wedding. I came up with a version of it really early on because I knew that I wanted to communicate from the beginning that it was an unusual relationship. And I knew, and so I should say there were many different versions of Afi. There were many different versions of Afi, and there were many versions of the plot. But I always knew that it would begin with this unconventional arrangement that would, among other things, signal to the reader that this is going to be a bumpy ride. This is not going to be your standard romantic relationship by any means.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting in the passage you just read too, there's this line about how he's leaning against the door frame as if he'd been waiting a long time to be let in. And it's almost ironic because Afi is the one who's been in the house waiting so long, and he shows up so casually, which perhaps maybe is also a signifier of how in some ways he seems so casual in this relationship of not actually showing up in perhaps the way that she is expecting. So one of the questions that someone's asked is, we begin with this the wedding scene, and so someone's asking to share more about the distinction between like a traditional church marriage, or sorry, a church marriage and a traditional marriage. If you can go into more of the details about the distinction, because I know that is mentioned about the differences.
Well, so traditional marriages, I guess, were the original forms of marriage in Ghana before colonization and Christianity and the introduction of weddings in the church that sometimes are called white weddings because the bride wears white. So a traditional marriage, and even people who get married in the church still have the traditional marriage. And now it's, people call it engagement, and then call the church wedding the actual wedding. But a traditional marriage is very much respected and is recognized. And there are many people who only have a traditional marriage and never go on to have the church wedding or to have it registered. And it's recognized by the community. Their children are recognized as children of a couple in a marriage. So I think having these two forms of marriage is kind of is a product of Christianity and colonization and the changes that have come. But at the same time, most people continue to respect the traditional forms of marriage, even though, like I said, it's been called in the engagement now, but it's really not an engagement, it is a marriage.
I see, yeah, thank you for that context. And it's interesting because someone else was commenting on that of like, we're talking about all the tradition and like the obligation and the patriarchy of these structures and of these traditions, but the book also does have some elements of humor, and so we're kind of wondering, what was your decision to kind of put that humorous spin on these very serious conditions that Afi and also more generally people are experiencing?
So I will confess that I was surprised when people read the book and say, "Oh, it's funny," because honestly, I did not plan to write a funny book. And I think it's partly my voice and how I communicate things. And I remember after I'd gotten some feedback, I asked a friend, I said, well, am I a funny person? Because like, I feel like when I'm saying something serious, it's being seen as funny. So it wasn't the plan. I didn't plan on writing a funny book, but at the same time, there are many situations that occur in the book that are funny because of maybe they're unusual, or just because they're so unexpected. And they are characters by their very nature. So for example, Uncle Pius, I do find him to be a very funny person, despite the fact that he's also the most annoying person, I think, in the book. But just his character and his entitlement and all of that, to me, it's annoying, but I also find it funny. So all of that to say, I didn't plan to write a funny book. I think a lot of it just came out of the way the characters experience the world that I created.
That's so interesting, because I think people probably read it both as serious or as humorous. So that's interesting to know that was not the intent. But I'm glad you brought up the character of the uncle, because I think I agree. He was quite an annoying character to, like, just in his dialogue and his, presence, and as you said, entitlement. So I would like you to go more into kind of the familial dynamics. I think this book presents both some, maybe, I don't know, some societal expectations of the gender roles within marriage, but also how intensely invested both sides of the family are, both the character of Auntie, but also Afi's mother as well. So could you maybe speak more on those elements?
Yeah, so the I think marriage in Ghana continues to be between families, as in, it's rare, or maybe it's not rare, maybe it's just that I haven't encountered it. But it's I don't know of cases where two people meet up and then just get engaged, right? Because they fall in love and they get engaged without any kind of discussion of the family or an involvement of the family. I'm sure it happens. I just haven't encountered. It's not something that I've encountered. So marriage, relationships very much involve families, and that can be a good thing. But as you see in the book, it can also be can lead to very difficult and unpleasant situations. But then there's also this sense of, or this expectation that we will always carry our families, we will always respect the elders in the family, right? So I've had conversations with people who have said, well, it's so frustrating. Why is Afi so concerned about pleasing somebody like Uncle Pius, who is not a nice person? And I think to understand that, one has to understand the importance of family in Ghana, and this expectation that people who do well have to take care of, close family members, but even distant relatives. And that continues to be a very strong pull, and it continues to dictate and structure relationships. So in trying to understand why Afi, despite Uncle Pius being such a terrible person, she still cares and she still welcomes him into her home, one has to understand the role that family plays within many societies in Ghana. And also, yes, gender roles are so very important, and we see it at play in so many different ways. And one important way is the emphasis that is put on food in the book. So I do write quite a bit about food, and it's partly because I think about food a lot. And I was outside of Ghana for part of the time when I was writing the book. And when I'm not in Ghana, I constantly think about Ghanaian food. And I think that kind of like filtered into the book. But food is so very important. And there's this very strong belief that this idea that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, and that a woman who wants to be recognized as a good wife just has to be an excellent cook and has to take good care of the home. And so we see Afi, like, she puts all this emphasis on cooking and cleaning, and that is just a product of these gendered expectations about what it means to be a good wife.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you're mentioning like how much emphasis she does put on this when she moves to Accra and moves into the new house, and kind of overwhelmed by both the scale of it, but that there's other people helping out. She has this expectation of, in a way, doing everything herself, which I think also perhaps brings into conversation also the conversation about class differences, the way that her and her mother have been living together, and then the shifts that happen when she does enter this marriage. And as you were saying, then the expectations of family, the uncle is then assuming he's receiving money, and that he can send his children to the house whenever he wants as well. So can you go into some of the elements of class that come into play, and perhaps how much that actually sets the conditions of this arranged marriage? If Afi perhaps was in a different like socioeconomic status, would this arrangement have even happened in the first place?
Yes. So that's a great question. And I don't think it would have happened. I think if Afi's father had been alive and still able to provide a middle class life that Afi was used to, I don't think that Auntie would have approached her with this arrangement, because a great deal of the help that Auntie is providing is very much also a means of controlling people. and there's this power differential, and she uses the help that she provides to ensure loyalty, to ensure that people do the things that she wants. And if Afi's father had been alive, she wouldn't have been in that position where she would have needed Auntie's help, and therefore Auntie would have been able to dictate that she wanted Afi to marry her son. So from the very beginning, the fact that Auntie is able to propose this marriage is very much reflects the class difference between them. And also, I think, a young woman who felt like she had a lot ahead of her in terms of future prospects, career-wise, education-wise, would have maybe not been so willing to enter into this arrangement, right? So I think Afi's the financial situation of the family, her educational background were all things that contributed towards her agreeing to this marriage. And then we see class playing a role all through the novel, right? From how she is treated by Yaya, when Yaya tells her, you're here because we've allowed you to be in this house. And when when we want you to leave, we'll tell you to leave. So even after she's been married and she's proven herself as a wife, she's constantly reminded that she is not, of their class, and that she is poor, even though she's married to this wealthy man. So class is just so very, so very important. And I think that even after Afi leaves a relationship, she doesn't think of herself as a rich person. She still thinks of herself as this woman, a young woman from a small town who happened to marry a wealthy man. And it's Evelyn who constantly reminds her of, you need to ask for more, you need to demand more. So even after she's been married to this very wealthy man, she still does not see herself as a wealthy person.
Right. And it's interesting. You're bringing up also like kind of this ending of when she is on her own. So I want to kind of walk us through that shift that we see that happens to Afi throughout the book, where she enters into this marriage, she moves, she's in this new house, kind of adjusting to this new living situation, but she still has these aspirations for herself. And it seems like she's kind of grappling with, what does it mean to be a wife in this relationship? But I also have these other desires for myself. And we see her slowly start to, in a sense, regain her voice and advocate for herself. So can you speak to that shift and how you wrote that shift in Afi's character?
Do you mean after she separates from Ellie?
In reading the book, I saw the transition happen somewhat earlier. I think we see that moment where she refuses to continue living in the separate house from him, and she returns home to her mother and refuses. She aggravates Auntie, saying, I'm not going to come back unless I live with my husband. And so we see her shift from kind of accepting, okay, now I'm a wife, to actually advocating for herself. So I'd like to hear more about that process of developing Afi's character to get to that point, which for me felt like kind of an escalation in her development.
I think a lot of things go into that. One is she gets to know him and she becomes familiar with him. And with that familiarity, there's more confidence and willingness to speak out plainly. So that's one thing. But then also the frustration is mounting, because she was convinced that once they had been together, they would not be separated. So there's that frustration. But then there's also the baby that plays a very important role, because she's like, I'm gonna have his child, and not only his child, but his son, because that's still important for some people. It's not only a child, it is a boy child. And so once again, with that, she thinks that is just going to be the key that will open up all the doors for her. And so there's like this triangulation of things, the familiarity, the frustration, and then knowing that she's having a son and thinking that those are the things that would open the doors. and then they don't open the door, and that just, I guess, pushes her over the edge. And that is when we really begin to see the transformation, where she defies him, and she defies his mother, and she defies her mother. And I also feel like at that point she knew that I guess she had nothing to lose. It was like the final stance. I'm just going to do this and hope that I get what I want out of this relationship.
Right, right. And it's interesting because I think we're now getting to that point. So obviously it was never a straightforward marriage, because there's another person, in at least one other person involved in this relationship. So there is this quote unquote other woman who has a huge presence throughout this story, but is interestingly rarely named. We hear a lot about her daughter and the tensions with Ellie, and her name's Muna. But again, it's this kind of this mystery that looms over Afi's life. And so, I mean, some people have been asking, what we do know about the woman, that she is Liberian, that Ellie's family disapproves of her, that her behavior goes against the expected norms, perhaps. So there were several questions kind of about both the power dynamics in their relationship, all three of them, then also the relationship between Ghanaians and Liberians, and perhaps elements of colorism, and whether that plays into the perceptions of this other woman.
Yeah, so the way I wrote the book, I wanted us to learn about the woman the same way that Afi learns about her. And so in many ways, we see everything through Afi's eyes. And that was, I think, one reason why that's very important, is that Afi is reacting to things that are happening. So regardless of people's motivations, regardless of who a person is, whatever they do, that is what Afi is reacting to. So in many ways, Muna's story is very important. Her background, her past, those things are all very important. But in Afi's story, all of that really doesn't matter. What matters is what Muna does and how Afi experiences it. And so this is why I made the decision to place Muna in the background, and for us and Afi to learn about her very slowly. But definitely there are three people in this marriage, and as the writer, I felt like Ellie loved Mona more, and that even though he claims to love them equally, I just was not convinced, even though I was also the one who created him. Because I think, and I do write in the book that even parents don't love children equally. Parents have their favorites. So to think that a man would have two women in his life and then love them equally, I just am not convinced about that. So I feel like in this relationship, Mona has the upper hand, and that's something that Afi becomes aware of near the end, and that's what pushes her to take the decision to leave Ellie, because she realizes that she will just never be number one in this relationship. And yes, the point about, so Liberia and Ghana, there is no conflict between Liberia and Ghana. I think Mona just happens to be Liberian because I was born in Liberia and lived there for many years. And I think I guess that's why I wrote Liberia into the book. But there is no conflict between Liberians and Ghanaians. But yes, colorism is very much present in the book, and it plays an important role. And I think in writing it, I really wanted to question the notion of what beauty is, because from the very beginning, from when Richard is telling Afi why she was selected, he's constructing this image of a woman who is light skinned and she's curvaceous, and that is supposed to be beautiful. And I think that one of the reasons that Muna looks the way that she does and she still gets selected, I think I really wanted to make the point about colorism and about ideas about beauty and how like people just love who they love, and that I guess we need to just accept that there is no one standard of beauty.
Yes, I think that's extremely important, and that point that you were making just now about like we love who we love, and so it makes me think about that kind of near ending scene, when Afi actually gets to see Muna for the first time, and she doesn't realize she's meeting her until she hears Ali come in the background, and then realizes that he's been bringing their son to meet Muna, and which I see as potentially a huge betrayal for Afi, which actually triggers her move to become independent and leave this situation. And there's that scene where she keeps saying that she loves him, and he says it back, but it's like, is that enough for her to stay in that relationship? And so I think what this book illustrates well is kind of this conflict between like is the title of marriage enough, and what is actually fulfilling. And we see this progression for Afi, as we were talking earlier, how she, she's pursuing her own design work and ultimately chooses herself and chooses what's best for her. But it's still a challenge because we see the intensity of her feelings. And so there was some questions in here about the way that you've portrayed the independence of women throughout this book. Although the main core characters are all unique in their stories, we see also the character of Evelyn, who presents a certain form of independence. So I wonder if you could elaborate more on the role, the way that you've created these different forms of independence through these characters.
Yeah, so I think the women very much reflect women that I've known throughout my life. Just very strong, independent women. And it was, I guess it's just natural that I ended up writing about women like that. And it's, this decision that Afi takes in the end. And I remember being a bit nervous about it and saying, is it realistic? And I asked this question because there's a great deal of value placed on marriage in Ghana. Marriage is so very important, and in some cases, as an adult woman, if you are not married with children, it's not unusual in some settings to be treated like you're still a teenager, right? And so marriage is so very important, and marriage to a wealthy man, now that is a big deal. And so I remember when I got to the end of the book, I asked friends and I said, do you think you would do this if you were in Afi's shoes? Or do you know anyone who has done this? So, and I was very pleased when people I spoke with said, yes, this is realistic. Because I didn't want to write a book that, so I should say that I'm very much a feminist, but I didn't want to impose my feminism on Afi. And I didn't want her to do things that were not in her nature. So breaking up with Ellie seemed in her nature to me, but I still wanted to be sure that I wasn't kind of imposing my own choices and desires on the character. But independence is just so very important, and it's something that I've seen throughout my life. And I think all of these characters are independent in their own ways. And my favorite character in the book is Evelyn, who just makes the decision to just do exactly what she wants, and she doesn't apologize for it. And women like Evelyn are often called disrespectful in many, I guess, settings in Ghana. And so where respect really means you follow the rules and you do as you're told and you don't defy anyone. And I just really wanted to write about people like Evelyn who were, in quotes, disrespectful, right? Because it's it's important to have disrespectful women, women who don't follow the rules and women who do not apologize. And so it's about independence, but in the Ghanaian sense, it's also about disrespect and me wanting to normalize disrespectful women.
I agree. Reading the scenes between Afi and Evelyn were quite enjoyable. I think I really liked her as a character as well. And I like that point you made too about not wanting to project your own feminism on the character of Afi. And I feel like that's what makes this book accessible in many ways, because we see her kind of come to her own understanding of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be independent, and in some ways defy expectations. But we see her kind of the growth that happens of her getting to that point. So I really appreciated that. There was a question from someone wondering whether any of these characters were based on real people that you know or experiences that you've had.
No, I think just over the years, I think the characters are based more on conversations that I've had, more so than people. And I've just had so many, partly because I was away from Ghana for a really long time. I lived in the US for about 9 years, did my PhD, did the master's, and then went back home. And I studied gender and I studied social relations. So I just had all of these conversations around women's place in society and how society treated women. And I remember, so I teach at the University of Ghana. And I remember I would have conversations with my students just about like people they knew and about people in very dysfunctional romantic relationships. So I think more than individuals, it's just conversations that I've had with people that shape the characters. But I was very interested. My father read the book. He read the book last week. I think he's the last person in my family to read the book. And he calls me and he's like, my father is convinced that Uncle Pius is someone he knows. And I said, I promise you, this Uncle Pius is not the person you think it is. But my father is convinced that Uncle Pius is someone he knows. And when he said it, I thought, actually, it's true. This person has some things in common with Uncle Pius, but I wasn't thinking about him when I created the character. I just think it's safer. I think it's safer not to create characters after people I know. I think it's one way to avoid unpleasant conversations.
That's a good point. Since you're talking about kind of how it's been received, I can imagine this has been an interesting experience, releasing your book in the midst of this pandemic. And I'm also curious kind of about the writing process to get to this point of publishing. Can you speak more about your process?
Yeah, so I started writing fiction many, many years ago when I was like 10 or so. And I think so I've had people say, who inspired you? I was like, nah, I just wrote because I ran out of books. I wasn't inspired by anyone. I was just a voracious reader as a child, and I read everything in the library. I read everything at home. I would go to friends' houses and borrow their parents' books. And I just was like, well, I can't wait for a new book. So I'm just going to start writing my own books. And so I wrote heavily until I was in my late teens. But when I started in grad school, I just didn't write as much. And I almost stopped writing just because the workload was too heavy. And it was when I was coming to the end of my PhD program that I started writing fiction again. I was in Boston and I had a fellowship at Boston College, and I was living in like this tiny studio apartment where my window faced a brick wall. And I would write my dissertation, but then also just spend long periods staring at this brick wall. And that is what this was 2010. 2010, 2011. So this is when the idea of Afi began to grow in my mind. But then it wasn't until early 2013 that I really started writing the book. but by then I had a full-time job. So I had this really crazy schedule where I would like wake up at 4 in the morning, write fiction, and then 8 I would switch over to nonfiction and teaching and meeting with students, and maybe I'll come back in the evening and write a bit of fiction. So it was I did this for about 5 years, until 2017 when I completed the book. Well, at least I had a full draft of the book. So that is what I guess the physical writing process was like. But I tend to do a lot of my writing in my head. So before I put anything down on paper, sometimes I will be thinking for months and even years about characters and about plot before anything goes down on paper. And in Ghana, I live outside of Accra, and I live in an area where it's very green and trees everywhere. So I just take these really long walks where I go over scenes and conversations in my head, and then after that, it all spills out onto the page. So that's kind of what my writing process looked like for this book. Now it's just been really tough having those early mornings. So I no longer do the 4 a.m. thing. Now I limit fiction writing to weekends, but even then, it's just, I feel like I should rest a bit on the weekends. So all of that to say, I'm still trying to figure out how to write fiction now because I really want to get more sleep. And like 4 a.m. is just not working for me.
I feel like sleep would be important to helping get words on the page. But I'm impressed with this balance that you're talking about. And I'm sure it keeps evolving too. You'll figure out what rhythm works for you. I'm curious, did you have an expected audience for this book? Who did you, when you set out to write this story, who did you envision as your audience?
Well, I hope that just every kind of person would be reading it. But I remember constantly thinking, what will Ghanaian women think about this book? And I think partly because I wanted to write Ghana in a way that was familiar to Ghanaian women. And I mean, a lot of the conversations in the book around marriage and fashion and food, these are things that Ghanaian women, I guess, will be the ones that are most likely to be talking about these things. And so I kept thinking that I want them to read this and recognize it. So yes, I had Ghanaian women in mind a lot when I was writing the book, and I've just been really excited that since it's been out, I've had conversations with so many Ghanaian women who've been like, yes, I was reading it, and it seemed familiar. It's like I feel like I've heard this happen, and there's this instance, and that just made it, I guess it makes me very happy that people read it and they recognize whether it's the situations or places. And I should say, so I grew up in Ho, and Ho is the town in which Fee lives before she goes to Accra. And I have never read a book set in Ho before. So for me, it's just, I like the idea that young people in Ho will like open this book and then see like streets and places and things that are familiar to them. I think it's so important for children, for young people to see themselves on the page.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you shared that, because I was going to ask how it's been received. And I mean, someone just put in the chat that it's one of the New York Times 100 notable books, which is amazing. So congratulations. But I think that's very affirming, hearing that you've had these conversations with people who can directly relate to the experiences or the spaces that you've illustrated in the book. And so I think that's absolutely a success. So we have a few more minutes with you, and so I would like, if you're able to, just share what you're working on now, maybe what we can expect to see next from you.
Well, I just completed my second manuscript, and it's different. So I sent it to my agent and I said, this is so different from His Only Wife. Or maybe I just think that it is different. Maybe it's not so different. But it's a book mainly about friendship. And it's about two cousins who are very close and then eventually come apart and their relationship disintegrates. And one of them eventually leaves to live in the US and the other stays in Ghana. But it's just an exploration of how relationships break down and how people, like you have two people who experience the same thing and then both of them are aggrieved and think that they have both been wronged. But I decided to write this book because, well, partly because as I've grown older, I've just seen so many of my own relationships come apart. Um, and I just find it very interesting how as people will grow apart over the years. And yeah, so it's just something that I wanted to explore in this book.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure we're all very excited to be able to experience that, to read that when it does come out. And again, I think that's something a lot of us can relate to, the way relationships evolve over time. So I really do appreciate you taking this time to share with all of us. Getting to talk to you has been absolutely wonderful. If there's anything else that you would like to share with us in the rest of your time, the space is open.
Well, so I guess one thing I can say about the book is I did consider Afi ending up with a man. And when I was writing, there was a period where I thought Abraham would be the person Afi would end up with. So that's why Abraham is in the book. But as the book developed, I said, nah, this is just not, I wanted, and I not only did I want it, but I felt like the character would want it. I didn't want Afi to be rescued by a man. I didn't want her to leave Ellie and then fall into another man's arms. So that's why Abraham is in the book. And I was like, should he still be in the book? And I did keep him. So that's like, well, I think one thing that might be of interest to people who've read the book. But I just want to say thank you. Writing is very, for me, writing is, I wouldn't say lonely, but I do it alone. I don't have much of I don't have a writing community. When I was writing His Only Wife, the only person I was speaking with was my sister, who she did literature in undergrad. So I would give her like chapters and she would grade it and give me like 8/10. She's very stern. But so she was the one reading the book. And I mean, she loved it, but she was my sister. So I was like, oh, okay, you like it, but you're my sister. So I don't know what everyone else is going to think. So it's just a joy that after it's been published, to meet people who have read it and people who have enjoyed it and who have connected with the story and with the characters. So I just want to thank you for reading it, for inviting me to join you for this conversation. I'm just really grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I am glad you brought up Abraham because I forgot that was one of the things, but because I noticed he kept popping up throughout the story and I was wondering, was he going to come back at the end? But I like the decision that you decide to make, that she chooses herself and she chooses what's next for her path.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Peace, for taking this time to share with us and have this really wonderful conversation. I think I've really enjoyed speaking with you and really getting to dive more into this book. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, that was wonderful getting to hear directly from Peace and have so many of your questions answered. Apologies, there were so many questions. I don't know if I got to all of them, but I really do appreciate the answers that she was able to share with us. So we have at least about a half hour left of our program. So we can continue discussing some of the topics that came up in that conversation. So if anyone would maybe like to jump in with an initial thought or something that you want to expand upon from what we discussed earlier.
Can I jump in first before we start the discussion about the book and just thank you, Nia, for leading such a wonderful conversation with Peace. You know, with Faith not here and you taking over the reins, you did an amazing job, and you really did such a close reading of the book and brought up a lot of things that I think people hadn't thought about. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It was very fun getting to speak directly with Peace, and she was really good at just elaborating on just the broader topics that we prompted her with. So folks are welcome to raise your hand or put something in the chat if you want to dive into another topic in more depth. Eva, did you have something?
All I wanted to say, I really did appreciate that this discussion really enhanced my, I enjoyed the book. It was a quick read, but I liked that book. But now that I've heard this discussion, you know, I have a deeper appreciation for what it took to make this book. That is amazing, because I know what I have to do with my own writing practice. And then I'm looking forward, like Peace, I will look forward to her future books. So thank you for introducing this new writer. She's really good. This is her first book. And so there's going to be wonderful things to come. And we're in the know. So, and now maybe I'll be reading more about Ghana or what, you know, it's just really stimulated my interest in a lot of things. And I'd love to hear what other people have to say about the book or what they think of any of these themes. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because of the academic work she does. I mean, she is a scholar and a teacher in the focus of, you know, gender, women's studies. And so you see the crossover. I know she, I think, has published some nonfiction, which I'm less familiar with, but it would be interesting to kind of see what that form of writing looks like as well. I saw a couple hands. Monica?
What I found really interesting was how she created the character of Afi and yet let Afi in so many ways speak for herself. She didn't impose on Afi any preconceived notions about how she would act. And I find that really commendable in a writer, to let the character really grow and bloom. So that was something that was really impressive for me.
Absolutely. And I think she spoke to that too, saying that she didn't want to project her own views of feminism on Afi and kind of let Afi explore for herself, which I think was very effective. Knowing that she teaches this, I think that could have been very easy to just have Afi be a feminist from the beginning. But I think it's interesting seeing the ways that she kind of introduces these elements to Afi's character throughout the different experiences that she has. I think I saw another hand that was up. Michelle, yeah. Oh, you're still on mute, there you go.
Yeah, hi. Well, one thing that I kept thinking of as I read the book was how the social safety net there is the family. And when I think of how I've lived my life, families are great, but to have to depend on the family for financial help is my idea of hell on earth. And there was an op-ed piece in the New York Times a few years ago, written by, she may have been Nigerian, but I'm not sure. And she said that what she liked about living here in the US is that she could sit outside, or when we could sit outside in a coffee shop and not be afraid that, you know, a relative or would come up to her and like stand silently and wait until she, hears what plea for help that the person has. And she said, here, I don't have family. And I just heard more stories about people, be it Liberian or American, encountering this family structure. And if they didn't exceed, then they either had a great amount of difficulty or they were frozen out. In fact, one of my mother's friends married a Ugandan back in 1962, and it got so bad that she had to flee. So I just found it just fascinating. Just fascinating. It just shows how here, we're a lot more individualistic than they are in a lot of old world places. And so I thought that this book did a really good job of depicting how that works. So
it was interesting how he spoke to the fact that this arranged marriage, it was a marriage of families, not individuals. Absolutely. Marema, you had a hand up, and then Renata as well.
Yes, no, that was a hand up. I must say, it's the best book I've read in a long time. And she was so visual when she would talk about Ghana, even though I haven't been there yet, in the way she described everything, and from the food to the people, and just culturally. I pictured myself in South Africa and Zambia because those are the only three places that I've been, okay? But the way she covered color, the way she wrote about class and everything the way it has been for generations. It's still here today. And it was a very fast reading book. I purchased it online, through iBooks because I don't live in the States, and I didn't want to put it down. That's a good feeling. And then toward, I guess, the middle or the end, you think about Nina Simone with The Other Woman, the way she describes that other woman in that song, for some of you that are familiar with Nina Simone. But God, it was just a wonderful book. And I'm so happy that I was able to be a part of this conversation and to see the author. Yes. And to have her talk about it. And yes, when she discussed relatives, you think, well, gee, these must be people that she knows. But then she said, no. But then when she's talking about it, when she's discussing it, I visualize people in my own family. And I just kind of pull back and go, But that's just the way it is. But what a very excellent novel. It really was. So thank you, Moab, for recommending it. It's been, I look forward to reading more of, her name is Peace, but I can't remember the last name. But I look forward to reading more of her novels. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was her full name is Peace Adzo Medie. But yeah, it was interesting.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, Peace. Yeah.
Speak to that point where her father actually saw one of the characters as someone familiar, even though they weren't. I saw Renata also had a hand up as well.
Yeah, so I just love the idea of a seamstress protagonist because it was like the entire fashion of Ghana just came to life, and this was not something I've read in a lot of books, and even in literary reads, we read the main story and there are a little these side stories that are going on about the other characters, but the entire parts of Afi, where she's trying to make a career for herself and the training she's undergoing and the patterns, the fabrics she's sourcing out and the beads and pearls she gets into these outfits and the entire fashion sense, the food that was depicted, it was an entire cultural experience. And that was something I really loved about the book, that went beyond the main story that Peace was aiming at. And I really loved that. It was not something that I've read before. And like Maremi was talking about now, since March and the pandemic, I have been more dependent on ebooks and Kindle because paperbacks have been so difficult. And I'm not really comfortable reading on devices, and I love holding the paperbacks, but I've been trying these past few months. And when you have such wonderful books, they really make that reading experience happier for you. And I'm happy that I came across this book and I could actually get to interact with the author here. So thanks so much for this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I agree, I definitely prefer physical books, but it's also fun getting to hear the story in different ways. And speaking to that point, I think it is nice, and what came out in this conversation with Peace is that it goes beyond just a story about a marriage or a relationship. That there's all of these other elements. We see Afi pursue her own passions, and her, coming to her own and what she wants to invest in. Do we have any other hands up? Sean?
Yeah, I often read for pattern and texture, I guess, or for wordsmithery or extended metaphor, something like that. And it may be that I'm a very visual person, so I'm kind of looking for, some experience of the visual in that way. But my experience of this book felt sort of entirely free of that. And it was like this effervescent kind of emotional experience. It just kind of washed over me. And this was the only book thus far, although I bought the book, that I experienced as an audiobook. So I'm kind of listening to the story. But I don't just think that that's it. There was something kind of almost thirst quenching about this story. And I don't know, I may go back and kind of dip into certain passages and see how I kind of re-experience them on the page. But yeah, it was really wonderful, and it came at the perfect time. This is a great story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I think there was kind of an accessible ease to the way of the storytelling, but the characters themselves had such impact, which I really enjoyed. Cheryl, you also have your hand up?
Yes, hi. So I this is my first time joining this book club, so thank you for making it available. But I actually read this book. I enjoyed it so much, I read it twice, because I read it the first time and I couldn't stop thinking about the characters, couldn't stop thinking about the story. And so I pulled a group of friends together and said, can you read this with me so I can have someone to talk with about it? So I read it twice, once for myself and once for our little friends book club. But one of the things that struck me was just how big of a role class played, because if we're looking at these two families, both women, both Auntie and Olivia, Afi's mom, were both widows, but one, because of her money and her class, was able to have so much control. And this other woman, again, both widows, both husbands have died, but Afi's mom really, the author talks about the shame that she experiences, and the just how she's ostracized from the community, because she's no longer, her husband is dead, and she's no longer able to provide what she wants for her family. So that just struck me how much class and money made a difference after both people's experiences of losing their husbands.
Right, absolutely. And I think it was also interesting hearing Peace's response too, when I was asking about whether this situation, this arranged marriage, would even happen in the first place if Afi perhaps came from a different class. And a response was saying if Afi's father was still alive, this probably wouldn't have happened, which is very interesting, both like the proximity of class and patriarchy too, and those roles, and how connected they are, and what plays out in the repercussions for Afi and her future. Let's see, any other thoughts? We still have a few more minutes before we'll give a little preview of the next books that we'll be reading. Yeva, yeah.
I just wanted to thank Cheryl for bringing up that the idea about the widows. That really helps me because I didn't have an understanding about Auntie and Afi's mother, like why they would. It just lends a richness. Like they are. I hadn't thought of it as like they are both widows, and even though I think the auntie came from that town herself. Who knows? She might have had a similar beginning as Afi did, coming from that town to go to Accra. So it really deepens my appreciation of the book. So thank you for bringing that up, that issue of widows and class and how stories play out differently. It really deepen my appreciation for the book. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great observation. Any other thoughts from people?
I think one of the things that I like so much about this book is how it's sort of deceptively light. Like it was an easy read and, it was very engaging and plot driven, but there was so much going on in it. And I feel like I learned more and more layers today with the conversation with the author and with all of you. So it's just something that I really appreciate about this book.
Yeah, for sure. Like everyone will bring their own reading of the book to the space too, which is fun, picking up on things we didn't even think about in the first pass through. Tamara, did you have your hand up?
Again, this is my first time joining. Thank you. Wonderful forum. I just wanted to say that I was struck by how generous Peace was in her character depictions. Nobody was evil in this book, as far as I can recall. I mean, Uncle Pius was a character, but although he was selfish and conniving, and he wasn't an evil person. And likewise, even Ellie, he's not she didn't really paint him as a bad guy. Everybody was optimizing the situation to their own benefit. And so it was enjoyable to read that, because there's so many books that, you can put you in a much darker place. I also really liked what she said about contemplating wrapping things up with a new boyfriend, husband, whatever. And I'm so glad she didn't, because that would have taken it into Harlequin romance territory, I think. This seemed much more believable, and it reminded me of the adage about, you can have everything, women can have everything, but not necessarily at the same time. She had amazing friends, a profession, a beautiful child. So anyway, those are my thoughts. It was a great book, very enjoyable. Look forward to her next one.
Yeah, that's a good point about no one was truly evil. And it's even interesting, as Peace was saying, that she intentionally wanted us to get to know the character of Muna, the other woman, through Afi's experiences, because all we really hear are rumors and speculations about her that all come through someone else's point of view, because again, they have something to either win or lose from the situation. So it's interesting when Afi finally sees Muna at the end, not realizing who she is, and she sees this beautiful woman, and they have this conversation. She has no idea, but then once all the layers are kind of peeled back, you bring in all of those other assumptions from the complicated nature of the dynamic. So that was a very good point. Any other thoughts? We still have a few more minutes.
I think
I have one more thought. That's just, I've read a lot of West African literature in the past 4 or 5 years, and it's such a fertile place for writers, for fiction, and also different. Any thoughts about that? I guess that would have been a good question for Peace. But what is it about the ecosystem that lends such great storytelling?
It's interesting because I think she mentioned she grew up in Liberia, and she now lives in the UK. So I think, I mean, what I found impactful from her speaking was what she was saying at the end, just about who she was writing for, and what she was saying about having this sort of representation in her writing, and that speaking with other Ghanaian women and having them really receive this story well. And also for people growing up in the city of Ho and being able to have their city seen in a book. I really appreciated her saying that at the end. I'm just looking to see if any other the questions. Oh, Maremi, did you have a thought? Nope, I think you're still on mute. We can't hear you.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Responding to the previous participant, way up in the mountains. And so at 8,500. So when Peace talked about being in Ghana, and when you're writing, it's very green, the water, the river, whatever it might be. But the difference is she's around her Blackness, which is so important for me, okay? I'm at a place where it's a perfect place for writing, but you can count the Black people, maybe 7%, that are living here. So when she talked about the food, the environment, you know, the people, all of that, that just touched me right here, because that's what I miss, and that's why I'm locked in here. Okay, I can't get out until the pandemic, meaning that I want to be back in South Africa. You understand where I'm coming from? So that part, this is the perfect place to write. It's a perfect place to be. But depending on where you are psychologically, the Blackness you miss. But at least she had that Black environment around her to be able to write.
Right. That's an excellent point.
So that's my thought.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was interesting hearing about her writing process as well, balancing both, again, her academic work and her fiction, and knowing that she, I mean, writing a book is a long process. It takes a while. I mean, I didn't go into asking her too much in this conversation, but I can imagine working so long to then publish your book, and your book is released during the middle of a pandemic. So the idea of book talks and book releases are entirely different in this space. So I can imagine there's both benefits and challenges to that she's experiencing right now.
Yeah.
So I guess in our last few minutes, if no one else has any final thoughts, we can share what will be happening next for the book club. So the book club meets on a monthly basis. However, because of the upcoming holidays and the new year, we will be taking the month of December off and then regrouping for the month of January. So our next month book club will be meeting on January 31st. And so because we have a little bit longer of a gap between now and our next meeting, we picked a slightly longer book. So this, the book we'll be reading is called Triangulum, and it's by a South African author. Elizabeth just put the information in the chat, both for the event, and I also have the link to the book itself, which we have at the bookstore. With this book, I think it's 300 something pages, so a little bit longer than our most recent book. So hopefully the extra month will give everyone time to really dive into it. But it should be interesting. It's set in South Africa in a near future environment. And so it charts kind of like the after effects of apartheid into this new future. So I think it'll be different from some of the recent books that we've read. I'm very excited dive into it. It sounds like there's a whole host of varying characters. So yeah, so for more context on the book, Elizabeth put all of that in the chat. Thank you very much. So we're very excited to have you all join and continue coming to the book club. Thank you for those of you, this is your first meeting. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Because we're in this virtual space, it's exciting that often we do get to have the authors. We haven't confirmed whether or not the author will be joining us in January, but even if not, I think we'll have a very lively conversation with all of us. And another thing is we do have an archive essentially of all of the books that we've read throughout the African Book Club, even prior to when Moad was hosting it. So we can put that information in the chat as well. If you want to peruse some of the previous books that we've read, we've only been hosting it at Moad since, I believe, September or October of last year. So we'll find the link and put that in the chat as well. But I would like to thank all of you for joining us and ask that if you have a few minutes following this program, if you take some time to fill out the program survey. We do really appreciate your feedback so that we know how we can best support our communities and keep coming up with programming. We also do appreciate any financial support. If you are able to make a donation to Moad, we greatly appreciate that. You're welcome to do so via our website, which is Moad SF, or we have information about giving by text. If you text the number 56512 and type the word Moad SF, that will direct you to another outlet to support financially. So I appreciate you all for being here. Thank you for taking this time Sunday to discuss. And we look forward to our next meeting on January 31st. Thank you all.
Stay safe, everyone. Safe and healthy.
Thank you, Nia, so much.
Thank you very much, Nia.
This is
course.
fun. It's going to be a long time till we see you again, but that'll be fun.
Happy Thanksgiving, holidays, Hanukkah, etc.
Yeah, everyone stay safe.
Yes.
Stay safe.
We have something to
and
look forward
healthy
to next time, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Stay sane.
Okay.
Hope we have a president.
And also,
Stay healthy.
if you miss seeing Nia, then you can join us for open mic, which happens every other Thursday at 6 p.m.
All right.
We have those, yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nia.
For being here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay.
I always wonder if the people whose cameras aren't on, they've just like left the room and they're not paying attention.
I think you're able to remove people.
Oh, that's true.
Also, you're still recording.